Containing one of the most diverse movesets in a Warriors game, Hyrule Warriors was truly a legendary entry into this series. For many, it was their first Warriors game, or at least a reason to get back into the series, and the level of care and Zelda nostalgia has made it a beloved game for thousands. For those players who were creating their formative memories with the series which was new to them, it was natural to find themselves not only gravitating toward, but also becoming extremely attached to their favorites in this game, and as a result, it has made it nigh impossible to create a tier list that everyone can be happy with. Having made guides and more for every single weapon in this game, I have seen defenders and detractors for all of them. So I just want to say that this video is my tier list. It's based on my experiences playing the game and creating my guides. I believe that I do have a strong grasp of which characters are over and underwhelming, as well as where the values or faults fall with the best and worst of the cast. You are 100% welcome to agree or disagree as much as you want, and just because I might think that a character you like or dislike is higher or lower than you think, doesn't mean that I'm saying that you're wrong. As long as we can have a friendly discussion about it, I am more than willing to hear your thoughts below. Anyways, I'm going to be talking about the mechanics of these characters as if you were already familiar with them. So if you're not sure what I'm referring to in any of these entries, I would advise you to jump over to my Hyrule Warriors guides playlist so you can check out the individual character guides that you're unsure on. Alright, let's set up this tier list already. I'm going to be organizing this list into 6 tiers, ranging from E to S. Because some Hyrule Warriors characters can have more than one moveset, each playstyle that they can have is going to be considered separate. For example, Hylian Sword Link is going to be ranked up against Epona Link, even though you can't bring both of them into a single battle. I may use the words playstyle, character, or weapon pretty interchangeably for the rest of the video, so just be aware of that. Also, for the watchers out there who have seen my top and bottom 10 weapon videos I made in the past, you should know that I have had some pretty significant changes in opinion since I made those. That was almost 2 years ago, by the way. So you're not going to be able to fully predict everything. You'll only mostly be able to. Alright, let's break down what each tier means. An E-tier character would be considered the worst of the worst, and would have to be ineffective at almost all normal tasks in order to be placed here. There are actually a few candidates for this spot in the game, and if you're savvy to Hyrule Warriors, I imagine that you're already making your guesses now. A D-tier character would have to be just a generally ineffective choice, a playstyle which has major flaws which can't really be worked around, or a playstyle that only contains 1 or 2 actually effective moves amongst other underwhelming options. C-tier is basically right in the middle. This is where the characters I deem as just okay will go. My picks here are generally able to get the job done in almost any situation, but are just not effective enough to push them any higher. B tier is the good level, where a character will go if they are an above average choice in just about any situation. Usually, their various mechanics combine more smoothly with their overall playstyle than those in C tier, which is usually what pushes them over into this level. A tier contains the best characters of the game, which are the ones who fulfill all prior requirements and still somehow continue to push their potential. The only characters which I'm going to possibly put above this are those in S tier, which is only for the borderline or outright broken. To get into my S tier is a very hefty requirement, so don't expect there to be many in here. While the rankings within each tier are not as set in stone, there is a definite top, middle, and bottom rankings for them. Again, this isn't 100% ranking, it's more just a suggestive grouping. For example, it would be hard to say which character in the bottom of B tier is better than the others, but I could say that a character in the top of V tier is going to be more effective than those at the bottom of it. Alright, that's enough setup, let's go ahead and get this thing going. We're going to start out with the worst of the worst, the E tier. Starting with the Great Fairy, this might be the only weapon in the game that I haven't seen anyone try to defend, and with good reason, I think. I know it's fun and all, but with one of the most unwieldy standard strings in the game, as well as combos which kill your time more than they kill enemies often enough, Link's Great Fairy is ridiculously flawed. When you add in the mechanic which can allow you to do more damage when you hit, at the cost of making her already big target take even more damage, it's easy to say that this probably is going to be your worst option in almost every situation. Moving over to Tingle, try as one might, it's hard to simply get anything done when playing as the little tyke. As the semi-official joke character of the series, it is fitting that Tingle does little more than happen to hurt others accidentally while he is posturing and posing. But as beautiful and perfect a specimen as he might be, he does do a poor job at handling just about any situation. While he does have one good area damaging attack, his C5, just about everything else he can do is disappointing. With a useless heavy attack mechanic that actually limits your options, as well as slow standard attacks and combos which when fully extended play out more like ineffective cinematics, a la the Great Fairy, Tingle's only real place is in this spot at the top of E tier. At least, he's the best of the lowest tier that I could possibly place him. With the E tier embarrassments out of the way, next up we have the much more populated D tier. Again, while the E tier characters were all sort of barely effective, the ones in D tier do have some positives to speak of. Starting out D tier, we have Wizrow, who despite being pretty bad, I happen to think is actually quite underrated. Even though most of his moves are sorta trash, his laser beam is decent and can be used to stun lock an unguarded enemy. Then of course we have his spinning orbs attack, something which when used on enemies will usually hit little to nothing, but when used on a stunned boss, actually turns out to be one of the best boss killing attacks in the game. This is Wizrow's best feature, and it does give him at least one useful feature, which is what puts him into D tier. Next up, we have the Gate, an interesting weapon which is unfortunately defeated by being one of the slowest and most random in the game. Personally, I always just try to end up with Argarok the Dragon as your summoned boss, as her dragon riding attack is excellent, but the randomness of whether you're going to get it or not, combined with the slow standard attack and other combos, really keeps this playstyle back from sitting any higher. It is certainly entertaining though, but that doesn't count for much on this list. Tetra is a really strange one. Like some of the other D-tier entries, she actually has a pretty good moveset, but is held back by one extremely fatal flaw, and that flaw is her pathetic range. In a one-on-one fight, Tetra can be powerful, there's no doubt of that. However, outside of this context, her rather wasted heavy attack slot, combined with a bad range on most of her attacks, makes her another tale of wasted potential. Especially sad for one of my favorite characters. For our sassy princess of the Zora Kingdom, there is a lot of good here. She has tremendous range, and some of her combos can really decimate the enemy, especially her area-damaging giant tidal wave. On the other hand, she has some really useless combos, which typically fail to hit anything while also eating up a bit too much time. Oh, also enemies can be thrown out of her special attack. It's a bit of a bug, but it seems to happen to me all the time. While I do like her heavy attack wave sniping, which can temporarily give her the best range in the game, I've found the delay between transitioning stances, combined with her open hitbox during some of her attacks, as well as her slower standard attack string, which can make it harder for her to break weak points than it probably should be, just end up giving her too many drawbacks. Link's Magic Rod is a really divisive weapon. For some, it's a fantastic moveset, whereas for others, like myself, just see so much missed potential. From my perspective, there are only a few worthwhile moves on this thing, namely the Magic Axe Swings, which do have a really great hitbox, and the final combo, which hits in a very wide area and is actually rather quick, and of course, its very long-range special attack, which in my opinion is one of the best special attacks in the game. On the other hand, its other options are quite poor, especially the easily blocked Extended Flamethrower. Epona is a weird one. While it is easily one of the most fluid playstyles in the game, like many of these other high mobility weapons, it really suffers in one-on-ones, as well as at taking down bosses, which to me are both just as important as racking up high KO numbers. The standard attack string here might be the best thing about this playstyle, as there is very little pause between finishing a string and starting up the next. And I do like how all of the area focus design here goes well with the light element effect, which raises your damage as you manage to consecutively attack multiple targets. Unfortunately for me, having only one job where you're good at is just not going to raise you any higher than D tier. For having ranked previously as the worst weapon in the game to me, Lana's spear here has risen considerably. Even though this weapon has one of the most awkward standard strings in the game, as well as a few RNG-based mechanics in her heavy attack and certain combos, examining what it does have a little closer can reveal its true value. For one, both her slingshot and Deku Leaf attacks are great combos, and even though I don't like the way she sweeps around midair after using her leaf, her landing heavy attack is an effective clearer, which can be set up through her sweeps. The balance of good and bad with this weapon make it a definite candidate for D tier, but at the very least, I'm happy to say that she can sit at the very top of it. Next up, we're going to be jumping into C tier, the okay characters. Starting out C tier, Fi is a character who almost placed into D with the very similar Link's Epona, but edged it out due to her ability to fight decently in one-on-ones. She has some great combos for this, such as her C3 and 4, which do a great job of piling in damage into very specific locations close to or in front of her, as well as always having great area removal. While she is lacking in other characteristics, most namely in breaking boss weak points, and having a C1 which pales in comparison to some of the other buffs out there, it all balances out to at least place her as my starting C pick. Medley will always be a character near and dear to my heart, especially in Hyrule Warriors, as she was the character with whom I launched the All About series, and is, I'm sure, part of the reason why I'm here talking to you all today. It doesn't hurt that she's a cute character with some of the most enjoyable animations with her combos, but when making this list, I had to set aside my feelings and give her an honest evaluation, which puts her right about here in C. She does have a good combination of single target attacks and area damage, with an aerial combo system which can potentially allow her to attack from near total safety, yet nothing that she can do strikes me as particularly amazing, or even particularly bad. She's really just sort of middle of the road. Ravio is yet another one of those characters who really rides the line between D and C, yet ended up here by virtue of simply lacking one of those big critical flaws that would place him lower. There's really not much that I have to say about him. He has a simple but effective standard string, a good variety of close and long-range combos, and a C1 mechanic that seems like another damage dealer, but is actually a crowd control button with two options. He ends up in lower C tier simply from his inability to stand out, with no great combos which would really accelerate him any further. Agatha is definitely not a favorite amongst the player base from what I've witnessed, but in truth, she's totally fine. The thing that you have to keep in mind about her is that even though she has very few moves, all of them are quite effective and actually give her a lot of range. Due to the disjointed hitbox of many of her combos, like her close and long-range beetles, Agatha mainly just has to be positioned correctly in order to let her minions do all the work for her. In situations where she doesn't have to be in the thick of the action, Agatha can still get a lot of work done without ever putting herself into danger. The only downside about her really is that she has a very slow attack speed, something which, when paired with her low move count, can make her just not very engaging for some. Personally, I actually adore her playstyle, and with hasty attacks on her weapon, she can overcome this lower speed to become truly frightening. But the rankings on this list are based on each character's base kit, and thus I simply can't put her any higher than this. Impa's Naginata is apparently a boring-looking weapon for many, which is ironic because it actually contains one of the more unique movesets in the game, one that is unfortunately a few tweaks away from really being great. Though she does have a good standard string and set of combos, the irregular pacing of her Naginata strikes can make it more difficult than necessary to follow up on things like exposed weak points, and personally, I just find the timing of transitioning into her C5 to be rather strange, even after hours of playing as her. The gate mechanic of her C1 is very interesting, but it is also very, very situational, with a short time limit which I find to be just a bit too brief to really get that much value out of. It's not a bad weapon for sure, but it's also just not a very good one in the grand scheme of things. In my opinion, Darunia is the definition of a mediocre character. Some of his combos are fantastic, with both his C4 and C6 being great forward area clearers, and also we have his rolling C1 attack, which if you manage to catch a weak pointed enemy at the right time, basically guarantees a weak point smash. While these are all great, this is then counterbalanced by his slow standard attacks with bad pacing at the start, as well as his other combos which can feel a bit slow for what they actually accomplish. On top of this, he he unfortunately doesn't have a good boss weak point drainer either. When we put it all together, the results are a character which I consider to be about equally balanced between good and bad. And from here on out, you can bet that everyone is going to be a bit more weighted towards the positives. I've always felt that Impa's Giant Blade is a weapon that at first seems really good, especially its widely damaging and quick C4, but as other movesets get brought into the game, it gradually begins to take more and more of a backseat for many. Like the others in this tier, it doesn't have a very good boss weak point drainer, and while its standard attack string is quite fast and mobile, the forced slide partway into it, which happens to be right before one of her most powerful attacks, takes away from your positioning somewhat. Combined with a somewhat useful but overall disappointing C1, Impa's Giant Blade simply doesn't have what it takes to get any higher. The boots are a very simple moveset, and are another candidate for the most average weapon right alongside Darunia. One thing that makes Linkle stand a little bit taller here, pun intended, is the fact that none of her combos really have any drawbacks. They all accomplish what they should, dealing focused or area damage in a speedy manner. The negatives which keep this weapon from placing any higher mostly stem from her lowish range with it, and also the lack of a good boss weak point option. This whole playstyle is just so bog standard for a Warriors game that I'm having trouble thinking of anything to say further, so why don't we just move on. Now, this is one moveset that I have softened significantly on. However, even though the baton sports some really excellent attacks, with one of the best C1s in the game if you're able to fully level your tornado, as well as a good selection of combos beyond this, the biggest flaw in this moveset is its lack of movement in the standard string. Granted, with a lot of dodge canceling, you can maneuver Zelda into doling out some intense punishment with this weapon, due to enemies who are caught in your initial attacks being bounced around by you until you're finished attacking. However, I find that unless it was a captain or a general, most enemies will just have been long dead. This is most definitely a flaw, but not one that I think drags the weapon down as heavily as I did previously. So I'm gonna say that C tier is a fine spot for her. The spinner is a technically complex weapon whose extra mechanics end up being unnecessary fluff on an overall good moveset. Here we have a weapon with a widely hitting but surprisingly controllable standard attack string, and a selection of combos which are all fast and effective. While it is possible to use the C1 and other spinners laying around to set up a 1000 IQ trap, the amount of time it would take to actually do this ultimately loses to just moving on and continuing to hit kids with your medieval skateboard. Due to the missed potential of this, as well as the lack of a good boss option, I had to think for a while whether the spinner was truly B tier or C, and ultimately I decided to go with a high C. The Sand Wand is a surprisingly underappreciated weapon, and taking a closer look at it has not yet revealed to me why. Similar to Agatha's Parasol, this weapon feels like it lacks a bit in complexity, but on the other hand, it accomplishes all of its jobs very well. From a standard attack string which balances its poor range with very wide hits, followed by a set of combos which are flashy, hard-hitting, and have extremely good range, the Sand Wand is way too versatile for me to place it any lower. This is not even yet taking into consideration its C1 mechanic, which can allow for quick, mobile, and near unstoppable train rides of death from Toon Link every couple of engagements. Like many of its peers in C tier, the Sand Wand doesn't have a very good boss killer, but this is the one weakness in an overall pretty well balanced moveset. Next up, we have B tier, which is where we're going to start to see some of the strongest characters or weapons in the game. Skull Kid is a hard one to place. When I first started using him, he felt amazing, but eventually I had to start thinking whether he was really that great or merely good. In the end, I decided to go with good. He has a very quick and effective standard attack string, which when combined with some of his fantastic combos, of which his huge area clearing C4 and 5 really stand out, yet at the same time he has one of the worst C1s in the game, a slow and effective puppet summoning. He is definitely one of my favorite characters to play as, but he's ultimately going to land at the start of B tier. Zelda's Rapier is one of the most average-looking but secretly complex weapons in the entire game. With generally two versions of all of her combos, charged with light or uncharged, Zelda has a lot of tools under her belt for a variety of situations. She has fantastic single-target, area, and boss-killing tools, and I'm especially a fan of her Arrow Volley Charged C4, which is one of the most difficult to land but satisfyingly strong combos in the game. Normally, a character with this much practicality would instantly be rocketed into the highest of tiers, but the fact that Zelda is locked into one style or the other by her C1 mechanic slows her down quite a bit, especially considering that she is unable to dispel any light charges she has, other than just burning through them with combos. Overall, it's definitely a very good weapon, but it's still a bit away from the crazy heights that others will reach. Boat is another option that I never feel gets its just dues, possibly just due to the annoying mouth sounds that the king makes with every one of his attacks. Putting these weird mouth sounds aside, his C1 gives one of the best buffs in the entire game, which is the ability to increase his speed and therefore DPS considerably, which is then combined with his fantastic standard attack string and widely damaging or very focused combos. With these, the king has almost everything. Without his C1, or with a much shorter timer on it, he would have certainly been lower tier than this, but as is, everything he can do makes him a great B tier candidate. So what I've been saying about underrated characters in this game goes tenfold for Zant. Not only is he underrated, he also has one of the most misunderstood movesets in the game. I'm not going to explain to you now how to make him work. You could just go to my Zant guide for that. But I will say that once it all clicked for me, his well-paced and effective standard strikes, combined with his combos, which feature both standing direct attacks as well as mobile area damaging, made him into one of the most flexible characters on the roster. Although learning how to manage his C1 rampages does take a little bit of thought, the reward for your diligence is going to be well worth it. The light sword is a very good option in most cases, although it undoubtedly loses to its older brother, the Hylian sword. On its own, this is a very well-balanced moveset that is able to do all of the normal stuff, 1v1s, area damage, boss slaying, etc. But it is let down somewhat by its smaller than average attack range. Toon Link's C1 jumping mechanic is fun to play with, although I can't say that it ever led me to any tactical advantages in a fight, really just being there to allow him to do air heavy attack spamming. Although this can be a decent way to rack up KOs, nothing here is really going to put him any higher than this. I think it's clear by now that I have softened on a number of weapons in this list. However, the Trident is one that I've actually gotten a little bit harder on. Without a doubt, for me, this is one of the most satisfying weapons to play as in the game, but as much as I enjoy using it, the lack of a true boss killer here becomes more and more of an issue, especially at this tier level. While everything else that it can do is really good, this conspicuous absence can land it no other place than here. Zelda's Dominion Rod and its smashy statues is a moveset with a lot of missed potential. But even considering this, the capabilities that it does have still manage to put it all the way into the upper echelon of weapons. At its best, Zelda is able to have her statues smash away at foes while she herself smacks the rod into those around her. Although her low movement while attacking usually doesn't make this a very common occurrence. Still, having the disjointed hitbox of the statue, especially the hammer statue, smash an enemy who isn't anywhere close to hitting you back, is an extremely effective tactic. Combined with a solid set of combos, the Dominion Rod feels just about right in the middle of B tier. The gauntlets have one of the better standard attack strings in the game. Short but sweet, the range of the ball that Link is swinging around make it very easy to wade into groups of foes and turn them all into powder with only a few strikes. Although Link's C1 here is mostly a joke, having very little practical usage, the rest of his combos all prove to be very useful, with his C3 being one of the better single target focused attacks in the game, and his C4 also being one of the better area clearers. There's just so much that the gauntlets can do with very few drawbacks that I can't help but place them very high. Imp Midna is one of those characters that took a while to grow on me, but once I fully understood how she worked, most notably how her charge bar mechanic worked, she became a true powerhouse. Like others in this tier, she is far from perfect, with a C1 and C4 which are barely worth it. But once discovering that repeating her C5, which is a mobile area damaging hitbox that also charges her buff bar, it makes her recharging mechanic a bit of a joke. On top of this, her C3 attack is one of the best single target attacks in the whole game, hitting enemies from both the front and the back, essentially negating the blocking that all your foes love to do. This is definitely not a character to look down on. The Book of Sorcery is one hell of a weapon, with a lot of great options that allow players to take out VIPs, clear out armies, and destroy bosses with ease. While it doesn't have a lot of combo options, every single one that she can do has its own time and place, with her C3 and C4 being especially versatile. With her C1 mechanic, which can make use of the last barrier that Lana left on the battlefield to blast all around it, Lana can turn single focused attacks into area clearers without even readying another combo. And this is all without mentioning that simply spamming the first part of her C4 combo is able to reduce boss weak points in no time. Long range, short range, delayed traps, delayed hitbox clones, Sia and her scepter have one hell of a toolkit. While her standard attack string is good, if a bit slow, it is Sia's combos which really shine, with her C2 being a great spammable area clearer, her C3 being one of the best long-range attacks focusing on single targets, or bosses, and her C5 traps utterly decimating weak points. To top this off, Sia's C1 buffs not only her stats, but also makes her immune to some statuses, such as the re-dead stun, which other characters with similar buffs, like 5, for some reason are still vulnerable to. All in all, a very dangerous and flexible character. Here at the top of B tier is where it really starts to kill me to not put some of these in A, especially because Marin in particular just has a fantastic moveset, with a very versatile set of short and long range damaging combos, as well as a standard string that successfully pulls off the mid-range attack strings that Link's Fire Rod and Medley's Sacred Harp were apparently trying to go for. Marin is truly a force to be reckoned with. A fully charged C1 from her works for absolutely every task, whether you're trying to decimate single targets, a group of foes, or a boss's weak point. It's only because I decided to set such a high standard for the A tier that Marin and the ones that follow in B are not going to be able to get in. Yuga was a bit of a sleeper hit added into the roster very late into the game, and at the time I never imagined that he would be as good as he ended up being. Yuga, like other B-tier characters, has a fantastic and well-balanced moveset, but what really brings it all together is his unique launching mechanic, where after every heavy attack you can hold or press the button again to lay out a time trap, and one that you can potentially use to limitlessly relaunch your foes. The damage on this is even higher than you might think, due to the properties of the lightning element effect as well. All in all, this is definitely a great choice and a very well put together playstyle. To be honest, without her C1, Toon Zelda is a pretty average moveset. In fact, without the ability to perma-roll her enemies to death, this character is C tier at best, having all of the capabilities typical to one of the Cs. A decent but not great standard string, decent but not amazing combos with one or two standouts, and a total lack of a boss trainer. Once her roll, cancel string was discovered, this character became a very different story. And I have to admit that being nearly invincible while you steamroll generals around the battlefield, while being very silly and a bit cheap, is the kind of brokenness that would have some players who love her likely put her right into S tier. I can't do that, however. There are situations where characters can break out of all this rolling, and in those situations, Toon Zelda's main course of action is just to readjust herself for another cheap roll fest, which I feel, in the long run, neither turns out to be as effective or fast as simply playing as any of the characters that I'm going to place above her. She's definitely a weird entry, but this is where I think she should go. Harboring what might be the most powerful C1 mechanic in the game, Girahim is both an assassin and a duelist, able to both fairly fight his battles without gimmicks, or if you want, you can just use gimmicks and cheese the hell out of them. Similar to Toon Zelda, without his special mechanic, Girahim would almost certainly be down a tier, as his unbuffed combos and standard strings are really not that amazing, but with it, he definitely holds steady at the very top of B, and in fact could arguably be placed in A. Ultimately, I decided that his cons would hold him back from getting there, but there is no doubt that he is always going to be a good option in just about any kind of battle. The Hylian Sword, as to be expected of Link's starting weapon, is one of the easiest weapons to pick up and play with in the game. Even though it has the longest attack string, along with the Master Sword, the number of unique combos that it can do is actually quite limited, a decision which was probably made to keep it very accessible. With only 4 real combo attacks, each one really has to hold its own weight, and of course they absolutely do. C2 is the best launcher in the game, with follow-up attacks that are swift and easy to pull off. C3 is borderline broken, with even the weaker Hylian Sword's version being able to endlessly toy with generals. C4 is an excellent area attack and launcher, doubling as one of the easiest boss weak point drainers in the game. Only C5 is a bit of a letdown, but having a mobile hitbox which pushes your opponent around does give Link some crowd controlling capabilities, showing that even this one has its own place. Technically containing some other small additions, like different chargeable spinning attacks and dodge counters, you could say the Hylian Sword is easy to learn but hard to master. But of course, it will get eclipsed very shortly into the game. Let's just go ahead and move past this one for now, to the few weapons that actually do manage to top it in the A tier. It's only fitting to start out A tier with the King. Ganondorf's blades are one of those movesets where every action has you feeling that surge of power, and the capabilities of this weapon when put up against the rest of the roster actually has the strength to back it. With a straightforward and easy to use standard attack string, which not only has good reach and movement, but also practically hits all around him, the blades fold into some of the most effective combos in the game. Of special note are his C3, which is a large single target focused long range attack, his C5, which does the same but for groups, and of course his C6, which not only literally slaps, but also is one of the largest and most effective crowd clearers around. All of this goes alongside his C1, a chargeable area blast that seems like it takes a long time to fill up until you realize that you can simply hold down the heavy attack button before unleashing any of his combos to fill it practically anytime you want. The blades are absolutely packed with deadly effective options, easily bringing Ganondorf into this bracket, yet staying at the bottom of it due only to their slight lack of speed. Linkle and her crossbow kata take the cake for the most enjoyable moveset in the game for me. But outside of this, they are also backed up with a very well-rounded and dangerous moveset. Beside her C1 mechanic, which allows for her to have controllable crossbow volleys every couple of attacks due to how fast they charge up, she also has incredible combos, such as her C3 and C4, which both do a great job at punishing single targets, and which are both easily followed up on by one of her bomb throws, as well as her C6, which is one of the best mobile area clearers around. Of special note is Linkle's range when using these, due to how they shoot a very good distance in all directions before you even get to any combos, which can sometimes result in crowds completely disappearing before you even know it. Often called the Lu Bu of Hyrule Warriors, like his nickname's sake, Volga is one incredibly powerful character. Similar to Link's sword, he has surprisingly few combos, but like the sword, each one absolutely pulls its weight. First, we have his C1, which is one of the only guaranteed guard breaks in the game, followed by his C2, an absurdly fast launcher which has so little lag between it and your next attack that it can be easily spammed out as much as you like. Next up, we have his C3, which is able to toy with generals using the same distance trick that Link's sword C3 can do. And from there, we have his C4, which was actually basically copied for Skull Kid, likely due to it being one of the fastest and most maneuverable area clearers. Volga's C5 is about the only debatable attack that he has, which, while it does take a long time to perform, and with it also being a bit hard to land, does give him some breathing room while also allowing his foes to gather below him. So I think I would call it a winner in my book. In order to be placed above Volga, the following characters need to possess some absurd capabilities. And, fortunately, that's just what we have next. Twilight Midna isn't just good or great, she is in fact a possible contender for S tier. She is able to function in close range, long range, one-on-ones, huge crowds, and simply due to the sheer number of people that she can injure at any one time, she is almost always going to be recharging her ridiculous C1 area blast, even faster sometimes than how Linkle can charge her crossbows. About the only downside that she has is when you try to use her C1 without it being fully charged. But learning to not do this is about as simple as learning to just stop extending Xant's combos all the time. Some of Twilight Midna's best options include her C4, where she summons up a gigantic cannon to fire a volley which goes a very long way, which also happens to be the largest long-range attack in the game, as well as her C6, another moving hitbox area clearer, but on this one she gets to ride on an even bigger wolf than Midna, because, you know, she really needed that. If any character benefited the most from the later versions of Hyrule Warriors, it was young Link. Already a powerhouse when he came to Hyrule Warriors, his unique ability to turn special charge into magic made him a very powerful but situational warrior. Having spent a long time experimenting with the My Fairy system of Hyrule Warriors Legends and Definitive Edition, young Link now rockets to the very top of A tier without a doubt. Without even getting any of the absurd rainbow-class skills of the fairy, you can very easily get 2 bronze skills which can be used to fill either his special meter or magic meter to 100% just by feeding your fairy a couple times. Which ultimately means that on the battlefield, young Link is going to have more time as the Fierce Deity. And when young Link is the Fierce Deity, everything dies. Oh, and I'll also mention here that you could just opt to not use the Fierce Deity mode, and instead use his unique C1 mechanic to constantly fill up your magic and pump out level 3 Fairy Blasts, which can not only clear hundreds of enemies at once, as well as putting buffing or draining spells on the battlefield, but doing so will also lead to items dropping on the battlefield which will then recharge you, which then leads to more Fairy Blasts, and so on and so forth. The more you think about young Link's capabilities, the more ridiculous things start to seem. Isn't it funny now to think about that he came in the same DLC as Twilight Midna and Tingle? As I mentioned, my A tier is a bit of an exclusive club, but it's nothing compared to what it takes to get into S tier. These are for movesets which are straight up broken, like it's not even fair that they're in the same list as the rest of these guys. And in Hyrule Warriors, there are only 2 movesets that I can place at such an extreme level. Whenever I get started talking about why Sheik is beyond broken in this game, I always like to start with the things that she has that other characters simply don't. Starting off, how about we talk about the fact that she has endless water shields, making her the best pick for absolutely any battle with strict damage requirements. In other words, most of them. Or there's also the fact that she can charge her own special meter from 0 to 100, just by standing around in a field that she can generate for free. Next, it's always fun to talk about some of the tools that were given to her that she didn't need given her already great moveset, like the fact that she can avoid 100% of all damage simply by dodge spamming at any time. This can allow her to wander right up to danger zones like a stomping in prison without any fear whatsoever. Oh, did I mention she also has the single strongest attack in the entire game? And although this fire trap can be troublesome to land, if you're just not that good at landing it, you can also use her exclusive gravity well that she can make, which can keep your enemies nice and still as you get it ready. If you'd like to hear me talk more at length about how to use Sheik and to show you the extent of how ridiculous she is, just watch my recent video, How to Get Good at Sheik, where you can get 30 minutes of just that. For now, I hope I've established my point, and we're ready to end this with a moveset which, by design, was built to be the strongest in the game. Seriously, what else could it be other than the Master Sword? Since I've already spoken about how this weapon's less powerful version, the Hylian Sword, there's not much left to say about any of the Master Sword's moves, other than the fact that they are just uniformly better here. The Master Sword is limited only in 1, its inability to have skills added to it, and 2, the fact that some of its extra attacks don't appear unless Link is at full health. Despite this, the Master Sword makes up for all of this through its immense damage stat, the highest in the whole game by a wide margin once it has been fully powered up. Even though you can do things like increase the speed and damage of the Hylian Sword through certain skills that you can put on the weapon, even without having full hearts, the extra attacks that Link sneaks into some of the combos with the Master Sword, particularly during his C1 and C4 combos, have always more than made up for things like that to me. Personally, I really don't like how the Master Sword was built to be the one weapon in this game that's just better than all others because it's supposed to be better. But that's the game we got, and I have decided that in order to make this tier list complete, I can't choose to not include it here at the very top. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The Master Sword is the actual Grand Commander for this game, and I guess we all just have to deal with that. I suppose if we ever get a sequel to Hyrule Warriors, they could balance it later on. Well everyone, that does it. My tier list for Hyrule Warriors finally set in stone for you. My opinions on many of these characters have certainly changed as I spent more and more time with the game's various releases. But now, with a 100% completed Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition behind me, I thought it was about time that I went ahead and got this project over with. Thank you so much for watching me everyone, and make sure to leave your own tier lists or reactions to mine in the comments below. Also, be sure to help me deal with YouTube and its fun algorithms by leaving a like under this video, and if you're feeling extra sexy, hit that little share button to help my channel grow even more. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you again everyone, see you next time.